Spreading violence, burnt out buses and buildings, travel chaos. One thing is for certain, the police seem quite unable to contain the waves of violent looting and riots all across France.
When a population is this angry, it doesn't matter how many police you put on the streets, you can't protect everything.
Well, as you can see, James is in Paris for us tonight to try and work out how the French president gets this situation back under control. Also on News at 10. The government's long-term plan for the NHS, will it solve the health service's many challenges? Shocking images of abuse in care homes. So how come only 1% of cases end in charges? The long-running hacking case against the Mirror comes to a close as others who are bringing claims await the judgment.
Without any doubt at all, what I do carry day to day is the treachery of the newspaper.
And a precious piece of cinematic history, the newly refurbished Hyde Park Picture House.
This is DanTV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. With smoke, tear gas and anger lingering in the air of French cities and the rioting unleashed by the police shooting of a teenager showing no sign of abating, Emmanuel Macron is facing one of the gravest challenges of his presidency. Last night, more officers were thrown at the problem, their presence failing to end the violence and only resulting in more arrests, more than 900 in total. Even more police are on the streets tonight. What difference they will make, the country is waiting anxiously to discover. In anticipation of fresh unrest, public transport networks have been shut down, and President Macron urged parents to keep their children at home and out of trouble. The UK Foreign Office even felt the need to issue a warning of its own to British visitors. Such is the concern that this crisis could rage further out of control.
Night 3 in the Paris suburbs, and for all the appeals for calm, for all the deployment of 40,000 riot police, it's getting worse, not better. What started in Nanterre has spread across Paris and then across France. What started as attacks on police has now descended into widespread looting and attacks on any property that stands in their way. These are the flames of 13 burning buses at a depot in the northwest suburb of Aubervilliers. Squads from the BRI, specialist police SWAT teams, are no more able to stamp it out than their regular colleagues. Endless rounds of tear gas, pretty much their only tactics. Back early from a European summit, President Macron, met by his Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne, rushed to an emergency meeting at the Interior Ministry. There had been talk of declaring a state of emergency, but in the event, there was little new beyond an appeal for parents to keep their young people at home.
Un tiers des interpellés de la dernière nuit sont des jeunes, parfois des très jeunes.
A third of those arrested last night were young people, he said, sometimes very young. It's the parents' responsibility to keep them at home. I call on the sense of responsibility of mothers and fathers.
Des mères et des pères de famille.
But video has emerged from the night before last, as the suburbs burned, of Macron attending an Elton John concert in Paris. The imagery does not help him. The damage this morning stretched right across Paris and from Lille in the north to Marseille in the south. These, the 13 buses gutted in the inferno last night.
The violence is becoming increasingly mindless. These buses weren't used by government officials, but they were a lifeline for the local community here. It does illustrate, though, that when a population is this angry, it doesn't matter how many police you put on the streets, you can't protect everything.
And the building behind the bus depot, the facade now scarred by fire, that's an aquatic training centre still being built for next summer's Olympics. A reminder of how much is at stake for Paris if things aren't brought under control. There has been a bandwagon effect in the way these protests have spread, but with the funeral of Nahel, the dead 17-year-old, tomorrow, it is not about to be brought to a halt.
And as we said, James is still in the French capital tonight. We've all seen, James, that Foreign Office warning to British tourists to take sensible precautions. I'm assuming tomorrow's funeral, there must be concerns that that's going to be a major flashpoint.
Obviously, yes. It's happening just about half a mile away from here, where I am in the main financial district. Starts at 11. The various ceremonies involved will go on till about 3, but I think it's after that you're likely to get trouble. There will obviously be a major police presence there, and what we've seen is that whenever you get the hardline protesters and police facing off against each other, it only ever ends in one way, and that is violence. And that's behind, I think, what the Foreign Office are warning. They're not saying don't go to France, but be careful because it's very unpredictable. This can break out pretty much anywhere. It is having a serious stretch. The French state is being seriously stretched in trying to deal with it. Another 45,000 police officers on the streets tonight. This is the third night of that sort of deployment, and of course they are getting exhausted. Many events are having to be cancelled. Public transport is being shut down at 9 p.m. to try and keep a lid on things and indeed to protect staff. One event that they seem determined not to allow to be impacted is the Tour de France, which starts tomorrow. The cycle races happen in northern Spain for the next 2 days, but then it moves into France, and that is always a major policing challenge, and coping with that at the same time as this, well, it'll be interesting to see how they cope.
OK, James, thank you very much indeed. Well, back here now, and there's no doubting the precarious position England's NHS finds itself in. You're probably all too well aware of it. Record waiting list, strike after strike by demoralised staff, and many of them are simply leaving, the result being more than 110,000 empty posts. Now, what the government announced today won't cure those problems anytime soon, certainly not before the election on which Rishi Sunak's fate rests. Instead, the Prime Minister claimed what he called a momentous 15-year plan to solve staff shortages would protect the service long term. On immediate issues, like staff pay, he had rather less to say.
Hi, how are you?
Almost 75 years after the NHS was created, some would say it is struggling to stay afloat. Britain has fewer doctors and nurses per head than almost all other European countries.
Shot delivered and back on the chest, please.
So can a 15-year workforce plan help the Prime Minister to revive things?
It's rare that people use words like historic and momentous to describe something that government and organisations do, but I think those are the right words to use to describe what is happening today.
The plan, which is for NHS England, begins with a promise to train more NHS staff, including doubling medical school places to 15,000 by 2031. To retain workers, it includes reforms to flexible working, pensions and childcare. They also want to cut overseas staff from almost a quarter of the workforce to between 9 and 10.5%. And they will consider tying dentists into some NHS work because so many go private instead. The NHS hopes this £2.4 billion plan will help tackle over 112,000 vacancies, with staff walking away, like Jasmine Brownlow, a paediatric nurse. Now in Australia, there is lots she doesn't miss.
First of all, work-life balance here, absolutely 10 out of 10. I feel like back home in the UK, life was work.
She says she used to dread going to work in the NHS because it was understaffed, chaotic, exhausting. And as for pay, she describes that as
awful. For the amount of work that we do and the amount of hours that we put in and the amount of stress that we're under, the pay does not reflect on it at all. I mean, you're probably spending like 50% of your wage on your rent and your bills. And you come to places like Australia and you get like 3 times as much.
There's lots of new money in here, Prime Minister, for training, but not new money for pay. Do you accept that pay hits morale in the NHS?
Look, of course, would everyone like to be paid more? Of course they would be. But I think everyone also recognises the economic context that we're in.
Some say this long-term plan is welcome but won't help patients on waiting lists now. Tina decided she could not wait in agony for 54 weeks to have a disc replaced, so she remortgaged her house to pay for private treatment in Spain. Does this plan give her hope?
I'm very hopeful that people 10 years down the line, my children, my grandchildren, this will, you know, they can get an appointment for these sort of things, but I'm not holding my breath.
And for Rishi Sunak, the short term is critical too. Junior doctors and consultants are walking out next month, and radiologists have today voted to strike as well, piling pressure on the waiting lists that the PM has promised to cut.
Well, the Prime Minister promising to solve the NHS's many problems is certainly nothing new. The crucial question, the million-dollar question tonight, is how much of a difference this plan can make, given the scale of the challenges the NHS is facing. And we have given Anushka the unenviable task of trying to answer that question. Good luck.
Thank you. Well, Tom, this is the first workforce plan, but the Conservatives have had a number of previous plans promising to revolutionise the NHS, from the ill-fated Health and Social Care Act 2012 to that Build Back Better promise after the pandemic. And yet, here we are with record waiting lists. 7.4 million people in England waiting to start treatment at the end of April. And as I said, over 112,000 vacancies. The UK relies heavily on medical staff trained abroad, more than 15% of nurses, more than that in other roles, and that is higher than Germany, France and the Netherlands. Now, this plan includes training plenty of people at home, but lots of it comes later in the 15-year plan. For example, we have 4,600 nursing associates now. In 5 years, that will be 7,000. We need to wait 10 years, and with funding not yet announced, to get to 10,500, but the biggest jump to 64,000 only comes in the final 5 years of the plan. But one of the key issues for the NHS is keeping staff now. Doctors say they're striking because their salaries have fallen in real terms, unlike in some other countries. And what about workplace culture? In one staff survey, 1 in 10 said they face discrimination. Maybe that is one reason why 20% of primary care physicians under the age of 55 say they plan to stop seeing patients in the next 3 years, long before retirement age. The King's Fund tell me there are lots of good things in this report to address these issues, but they won't address them fast.
It really does give up to the name of a long-term plan. Most of the initiatives are things that will make a difference from 2 years' time in the future onwards. So if you're asking about, well, how will this plan help the NHS get through the winter, get through a summer of industrial action, there's relatively little in the document that answers those questions.
And look, those problems are pressing. Tom, doctor strikes start in weeks, just before Rishi Sunak faces 3 by-elections.
OK, Anushka, very clear. Thank you very much indeed. Now, it goes without saying that health workers right across the country do an incredible job. But what we've also uncovered is that when abuse does take place in care homes, it is rarely prosecuted. Our research found that only around 1% of allegations in England and Wales resulted in a charge. And the evidence we have seen and are about to show you is disturbing indeed. Secret filming by one family revealed that 88-year-old dementia patient Anne King was being mocked and teased and manhandled, even left struggling on the floor for nearly an hour.
A member of staff at a care home in an elderly woman's room starts flicking a rag at her face. "Don't do that," she says. "It frightens me." Then he appears to offer a fist bump. "Do it nicely," she asks. But he does it too hard. "You're hurting me," she says. The lady is taunted again and again. The same staff member holds a bin full of rubbish over her head. And then another switches the light in her room on and off. The woman in the bed was Anne King, a woman who spent her life caring for other people. She was a qualified nurse herself. For many years she specialised in teaching children how to use their prosthetic limbs. She stopped working when she adopted 2 children of her own, a daughter Claire and a son Richard.
We were looking to put her in somewhere that could be, she could be looked after and, professionally and be in a safe environment. In fact, it turned out to be the complete opposite.
Anne suffered from dementia. She died last summer, a few months after her children had taken her out of the home where her days and nights had been spent in fear.
Mum was coming out with disturbing things like, she said, don't don't leave me on their own. Please don't leave me. Take me with me. Can I come home with you? You know, Mum, what's the matter? She said, I'm so scared, I'm so frightened. What's the matter? And she said sometimes she couldn't recall, but then she would say about people come in and hurt me.
Richard was so concerned by what his mum was telling him, he installed a secret camera on her bedside table. As well as what you've already seen, it recorded her rough treatment at the hands of her carers and Anne's cries of distress.
I broke. I totally broke, because obviously it's full sound, it's full picture. I could hear Mum screaming, you know, and it broke me. And obviously I called Richard and called the police.
The police say that Anne's case was referred to the Crown Prosecution Service, who advised that the thresholds for criminal charges of assault or abuse hadn't been met. The care homes apologised and explained that what happened to Anne was the result of reprehensible behaviour by rogue members of staff. But the research that we've done lends weight to claims that not only is abuse behind the closed doors of the care sector widespread, but that very rarely is anything done about it. ITV News asked each of the 43 police forces in England and Wales how many allegations of abuse or neglect in care homes were reported to them last year. 16 of them got back to us, and they told us that in total 1,080 allegations had been made, but only 16 criminal charges had been brought.
Often to abuse an elderly person can be quite subtle. Doesn't have to be something that's visible or clear, but it could be quite subtle, especially if the resident has dementia and they're not often aware of what's going on.
The care workers who shook Anne's bed and who left her on the floor, confused and frightened, no longer work for the company they were employed by here. But the disturbing question remains, how many more people are suffering like this in the dark corners and long hours of the care sector that the outside world so very rarely sees? Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
Shocking scenes to witness. Now, the phone hacking case brought by Prince Harry and others against Mirror Group newspapers drew to a close today. We will have to wait until the autumn to discover the outcome, with many interested parties awaiting the ruling. Among them are, of course, the Duke of Sussex and the 3 others involved in the case, but also over 100 more who are bringing their own claims. And then there is the Mirror itself, for which the judgment could have huge implications.
He's in the land of total speculation, according to lawyers for Mirror Group newspapers. But Prince Harry insists they used utterly vile criminal tactics like phone hacking and deception to invade his privacy since he was a child grieving his mother. Today, his barrister had the last words of this 7-week trial, saying Mirror Group newspapers had lied about it to Parliament, to the Leveson inquiry and to shareholders, showing the truly dismissive nature of the defendant's attitude to the claims that have been brought against it by thousands of victims. There are 4 claimants in this trial: royalty, soap stars and those not in the spotlight, picked from more than 100 who are suing the publisher of the Daily Mirror, the Sunday Mirror and the People. Prince Harry says articles about the breakdown of his parents' marriage, his health, ex-girlfriends were illegally obtained, causing him paranoia, even eroding his relationship with his brother. The publisher says his case is striking for an absence of evidence.
At one point this morning, the lights suddenly went off in the courtroom. Another first, for me at least, at the High Court. In this trial, we've heard from a prince, private investigators and many in between. Countless court documents filed by lawyers locked in an, at times, bad-tempered legal battle, clocking up what must be eye-watering legal fees. But for Mirror Group newspapers, the cost of losing would be far greater.
20 years ago.
There are many watching with interest. This image, after the 7/7 bombings, suddenly made Paul Dadge a target for tabloid intrusion. The News of the World hacked his phone. Now he's bringing a claim against Mirror Group newspapers.
Many people would expect, being involved in the aftermath of a suicide attack, would have this everlasting effect on me, but without any doubt at all, what I do carry day to day is the treachery of the newspaper.
The fatal hole in Mirror Group's case, say the claimants, is the absence of journalists like former Mirror editor Piers Morgan, who didn't give evidence. He denies knowledge of phone hacking. Prince Harry's seeking more than £400,000 in damages, but for him, this has never been about the money. Now, the judge must decide. His ruling expected in the autumn. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.
Well, whilst Prince Harry and many others are made to wait for that ruling, there was a significant decision tonight linked to his wife. You may remember, indeed, how could you forget, the ill-judged column Jeremy Clarkson somewhat weirdly wrote in The Sun about the Duchess of Sussex, the one in which he said he dreamed of her being paraded naked and publicly shamed. Well, the press watchdog has agreed that what he wrote was, yes, indeed, sexist. It's the first such ruling of its kind, and one which again raises questions about how it was ever published in the first place.
This thing is enormous. Jeremy Clarkson's opinionated, outspoken style has gained him fans, TV programmes and newspaper columns.
Oh, now we're in trouble.
But one of those columns directed at the Duchess of Sussex resulted in widespread outrage. And tonight, a milestone ruling by the press regulator. For the first time, it has upheld a complaint based on sexism, a move welcomed by one of the groups which brought that complaint.
It sends a very clear message that we might have had to have put up as women with this kind of hate in public life for generations, but actually now we're standing together and we're saying time's up. We're not going to put up with it anymore, and the press will be held accountable for spreading sexist and discriminatory ideas.
In the article, Jeremy Clarkson said he hated Meghan Markle. Not like I hate Nicola Sturgeon or Rose West, he wrote. I hate her on a cellular level. At night, I'm unable to sleep as I lie there, grinding my teeth and dreaming of the day when she is made to parade naked through the streets of every town in Britain, while the crowds chant shame and throw lumps of excrement at her.
It's obviously not that common that we get complaints about discrimination on grounds of sex and that we investigate them and take them forward as we did in this way. It's also, this was the highest number of complaints we've ever had about a single article. So although it was investigated and ruled on in exactly the same way as any other complaint, we were certainly aware that this was an issue of significance to a lot of people.
This evening, The Sun, which published the column, said the newspaper and Clarkson apologised at the time, regretted the article and removed it from their website.
There are two small changes to the show and one...
The Sun added it accepts that with free expression comes responsibility. That responsibility is now under closer scrutiny following tonight's landmark ruling. Mark McQuillan, News at 10.
A court has heard Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey abused his reputation and fame to become a sexual bully. The Hollywood star appeared at Southwark Crown Court today as the trial in which he's accused of sexual offences against 4 men began. A jury heard Spacey took what and who he wanted when he wanted. Spacey denies the charges. We talked earlier about one of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges, cutting NHS waiting lists. Another, of course, is halving inflation, which homeowners would certainly welcome. They've seen mortgage rates soar and the value of their prized asset drop. House prices fell 3.5% in the past year. And it could get worse. The government's official forecaster told Joel prices could plummet by as much as 15%.
The Romans decided that Exeter was a good place to settle, and over the years that sentiment has been shared. During the pandemic, Londoners rushed here in a race for space. The housing market boomed, but the era of cheap borrowing is over. Charlotte Moore and her partner have just remortgaged. They extended their term, but will still end up paying £360 a month more.
It's going to be okay, we'll manage. We have switched to SIM-only phone packages. We have tried to be a bit more savvy with our food shopping. We're looking at giving up our Sky package because that's just a luxury that people can't afford right now.
Mortgage rates have surged and are still edging up. Lenders are repricing as the financial markets bet that interest rates will need to rise even further to tame inflation. Back in March, the Office for Budget Responsibility forecast that house prices would fall by 10% from their peak. Now its chief economist thinks a drop of up to 15% is more probable, but he says a crash is unlikely.
I mean, if one defines a crash as house prices falling 20-25% in a year, nobody should ever say never, but it seems to me that that's not the most likely outcome. I think the inflation numbers will improve over the course of the rest of this year. That may have an impact on mortgage rates, and things might not look so grim come the end of this year.
According to the Nationwide, the price of the average home in the UK stood at £262,000 in June, down 4% from the peak last August. If David Miles is right, then there's further to fall. Since 2014 and until recently, banks have been obliged to stress test borrowers to ensure that they could cope if interest rates rose by 3%. Higher mortgage repayments are clearly painful, but David Miles believes that most homeowners will find a way to manage, and he thinks Britain's inflation problem isn't as bad as the markets fear.
Every day they're getting pulled.
James Miles is a mortgage broker. He says he gets daily emails from lenders pushing up rates. Longer mortgage terms and the option of interest-only payments help, but a few of his clients have been forced to sell up.
Mainly probably landlords, accidental landlords, older generation that are reliant on their income. Their margins have been cut and they've been living on their profits over however many years, but they are definitely selling and those houses are coming on the market.
Like the economy, the housing market has proved resilient in recent months, but the full force of higher interest rates has yet to be felt, and even in places like Exeter, boom can turn to bust. John Hills, News at 10.
England's cricketers may be pioneering a brave new approach, but there was a familiar feeling for fans today as their Ashes hopes were left hanging by a thread at Lord's after throwing away a strong start with the bat yesterday. The theme continued this morning with their final 6 wickets lost for just 46 runs. Then followed a composed performance from Australia's openers in their second innings, who finished the third day 221 runs ahead with 8 wickets in hand. Finally, if it's entertainment you want, then the choices can seem endless with a reel of films and TV shows streaming in your living room. But for some, nothing beats a night at the cinema. And for more than 100 years, film lovers have been drawn to the gaslit glow of the Hyde Park Picture House in Leeds. It's a precious piece of history, which has just reopened after a multi-million-pound upgrade fit for the future, whilst keeping its past alight.
Longer than any Hollywood blockbuster, this story's been more than 100 years in the making, costing millions. And like any good movie script, it's a story of survival against all the odds. Tonight, it reopened.
I've never been myself, but I've heard loads of amazing things about it, and it was just one of those places that I've just been really excited for it to open up.
We used to come anyway, so we've been waiting to come back, so it was very excited, but yeah, it looks fantastic.
I don't live in Leeds, I live in London, and I came up here especially for this.
And he's not the only one who's been on a long journey. This makeover from the projection box to the plush seating has taken 3 years. Some things have stood the test of time, though, including these gas lights.
What's the story behind those?
So they would have originally been called modesty lighting, and I think they would give a little bit of extra light for the ushers to help them to do their job, kind of keep an eye on enthusiastic audience members, should we say, people doing a little bit of too much courting, perhaps.
During the renovations, tales of times gone by were discovered.
Cigarette packets, we found sweet wrappers, lollipop wrappers, ice cream tubs.
All found under the floorboards.
We think maybe there was a few lazy cleaners over the years that probably swept lots of the rubbish into this little hole in the ground. And that's actually been incredible that they did that, because inadvertently they've created this time capsule in the picture house that we've just unearthed.
The first films here would have been seen in black and white, but the owners are hoping that its future will be colourful. Kelly Foran, News at 10, Leeds.
Looks like it's worth a trip to Leeds. That is all we've got time for. Have a brilliant weekend. Good night. Thank you for watching.